Books on Tape presents The Majesty of the Law, Reflections of a Supreme Court Justice by Sandra Day O'Connor, read by Bernadette Dunne. Preface. When my husband, John, and I packed up and moved from Arizona to Washington, D.C. in 1981 to begin my service on the nation's court, we looked forward to the many new experiences, both professional and personal, we were sure to have. Enjoying new and wonderful friends, meeting with presidents, vice presidents, cabinet members, ambassadors, and other justices and judges from around the world. Travel to each of the 50 states and sometimes other countries for speeches or meetings. And most important, I looked forward to the privilege of applying myself to work worth doing, addressing the toughest legal issues in our nation, helping shape the development and explanation of the principles of federal law required to resolve these issues. I felt molded, in large part, by my life in the Southwest, where I had spent my earliest days on a cattle ranch in a dry and isolated part of the Arizona desert. My favorite author, Wallace Stegner, put it best when he said, "There's something about living in big, empty space, where people are few and distant, under a great sky that's alternately serene and furious, exposed to sun from 4 in the morning till 9 at night, and to a wind that never seems to rest. There's something about exposure to that big country that not only tells an individual how small he is, but steadily tells him who he is." This book is an attempt to speak about my exposure not only to the Arizona desert and sun, but to the rest of our country as well, exposure to the richness of its history, to the Supreme Court and to some of its members, and to some of the legal issues I have confronted along the way. When the Supreme Court sat on the bench again the first Monday of October 2001, it had its full complement of 9 members. 1 appointed by President Ford, Justice John Paul Stevens, 4 by President Reagan, Chief Justice Rehnquist, myself, Justices Antonin Scalia and Anthony Kennedy, 2 by President Bush, Justices David Souter and Clarence Thomas, and 2 by President Clinton, Justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Stephen Breyer. The process of nominating a new justice tends to receive a good deal of attention. In more than 200 years, the court has had only 108 justices, which comes to about 1 appointment every 2 years. An appointment to the court is therefore, in terms of frequency, about half as special as a nomination to the presidency, and involves infinitely less public participation and releasing of balloons. Nonetheless, a court appointment, which requires both nomination by the president and confirmation by the Senate, is an occasion for public interest, as we have been reminded graphically in the past 20 years. The person making the nomination, the president, doubtless pays special attention to these appointments. From the president's point of view, I suppose it's a little like trying to rear children. The president only gets to control the process for a brief period, in choosing a particular nominee, and then the justice, like an 18-year-old, is free to ignore the president's views, and justices are usually walking around in their judicial chambers long after the president who appointed them has departed the Oval Office. Parenting and nominating justices have both been common activities among presidents. All of our presidents except 7 had children, and all except 3, Harrison, Taylor, and Carter, nominated at least 1 Supreme Court justice. Like fathers in an earlier day, the president makes the proposal and escorts the new justice down the aisle in the marriage between the justice and the court, which, barring impeachment, lasts until death does them part. As I suspect has been the case with most justices, my nomination to the court was a great surprise to the nation, but an even greater surprise to me. My former colleague, Justice Lewis Powell, once said that being appointed to the court was a little like being struck by lightning, in both the suddenness and the improbability of the event. I certainly never expected to be on the court. Rather, I looked forward to continuing my career as a state court judge, having served happily as a trial judge and then, with equal contentment, on the Arizona Court of Appeals, for whose members I had deep affection and great professional respect. I had anticipated that I would live the balance of my life in our adobe house in the desert, where John and I had many friends and a pleasant way of life, and where we expected our sons to settle. My situation changed dramatically on June 25, 1981, when then Attorney General William French Smith called my home and said he wanted to talk to me about the Potter Stewart vacancy on the Supreme Court. The metaphorical lightning bolt suddenly seemed as if it might head in my direction, and I was about as astonished, though slightly less frightened, as if I had seen a real bolt of lightning making its way straight for me. The Attorney General asked me to come to Washington to visit with him, with some of President Reagan's staff and close advisers, and with the President himself. I did so, and on July 6th, 12 days after Attorney General Smith first phoned me, the President called to ask if he could announce his intention to nominate me to the court. I said I would be honored if he did. From my point of view, the nomination was traditional in at least some ways. Like many nominees, I went to Capitol Hill to pay my respects to the appropriate legislators, and, as I imagine is the case for all nominees, I lay in bed the night before the confirmation hearings, worrying about how I would be treated and how well I would be able to respond to the questions. After sitting in the witness chair on national television, answering endless questions about the Constitution, various cases, and my personal feelings on some of life's great issues, I began to think that the hearings would never end. Fortunately, however, Nancy Thurmond was giving a tea for me at 4 o'clock on the third day of the hearings. Mr. Thurmond, otherwise known as Senator Strom Thurmond, was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and so fortunately he made sure that I got to his wife's tea on time. I was sworn in on Friday, September 25, 1981. At the President's request, John and I rode with him and Mrs. Reagan from the White House to the Supreme Court. While I waited to take the oath of my new office, I was seated in the chair that John Marshall had once used. After my voice echoed the Chief Justice's administration of the oath, I was seated at the end of the bench in our beautiful courtroom, and I looked down at my parents, my husband, and our 3 children. I will never forget that moment. Oscar Wilde said that the only thing worse than being talked about was not being talked about. I will readily confess, however, that my first years on the Supreme Court sometimes made me yearn for obscurity. The press constantly accompanied me in huge flocks. Everywhere that Sandra went, the press was sure to go. With some exceptions, things have quieted down since, but amusing stories do still result from my former media exposure. John witnesses some of the incidents that I don't see and laughingly relates them to me. After being in Washington a few years, we went to a restaurant for dinner with one of my law clerks. On our way out, John heard someone say about me, "It doesn't look like her, but it's her." Others have asked me if I knew how much I looked like Sandra O'Connor. Some say, "Don't I know you?" And a few people, when they hear that Justice O'Connor is present, walk over to shake John's hand and tell him how proud they are to meet a justice. The appointment of a woman to the Supreme Court of the United States opened many doors to young women all across the country. The following letter that I received shortly after I was nominated sums up how a great many women in this country reacted to President Reagan's decision. I cannot begin to describe with what delight I viewed the surprising headlines in Chicago's newspapers the day of your nomination. I actually stood there with my mouth hanging open and an idiotic grin on my face, feeling overwhelmingly euphoric and proud. What it affirms to this 27-year-old female is that determination, judiciousness, skill, and professionalism are valued and rewarded in our society, that females certainly do possess these qualities, that people will find it increasingly difficult to deny and discourage these in females, and that there is absolutely no excuse not to get everything I want in life. Some women even gave me advice about how to deal with my brethren. One wrote, "I am so proud of you as..."
Sample complete. Ready to continue?